The CEO whispered in German to hide his plan. The waitress translated every word without looking up. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was an ordinary night at La Belle Époque, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. The clink of silverware, the hum of quiet conversations, and the soft light filtering through the crystal chandeliers set the stage. The restaurant was bustling with its usual elite clientele, but tonight, something was different. Sarah Matthews, a young waitress, moved through the room with practiced grace, her sharp eyes scanning for any needs the guests might have. She was just one of the many who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, making sure everything was in place. But tonight, Sarah would find herself at the center of a moment that would change everything. At a corner table, the CEO of Anderson Capital, Jack Anderson, sat with a group of high-powered businessmen. Jack was a man of imposing presence, tall, sharply dressed, and always in control. His platinum watch gleamed in the low light, and his gaze was cold, focused on the plans before him. He had built his empire through ruthless negotiations and calculated risks, and tonight was no different. The conversation, however, wasn't just about business. Jack was hiding something. He leaned in close to his associate, speaking softly in German, the language flowing effortlessly from his lips. He assumed the waitress wouldn't understand. Sarah, however, was no ordinary waitress. She had grown up in Germany, and though she now lived in New York, the language still flowed through her as easily as her native tongue. As Jack's voice lowered, she caught every word he said. He was discussing a deal that could change the financial landscape for millions, and he wanted to keep it hidden from the rest of the table. He wanted privacy, secrecy, but Sarah had other plans. She didn't flinch. She didn't show any sign that she had heard what was being said. Instead, she moved quietly through the room, collecting dishes, wiping down tables, and keeping her composure. The words Jack whispered were still fresh in her mind, but she kept her face neutral. As she passed his table, Jack turned his head just slightly, enough to catch her eye for a brief moment. He didn't think much of it. She was just a waitress, after all. But what Jack didn't realize was that Sarah had just decoded his plan. Every word, every detail. She could feel the weight of the information in her chest. And yet, she said nothing. She simply walked on, leaving Jack to his false sense of security. It wasn't until later, when Jack received a subtle message from a business rival, that he would realize the true extent of his mistake. Sarah was no ordinary waitress. The night continued at La Belle Époque, but Sarah couldn't shake the words Jack had whispered earlier. She moved through the restaurant with a quiet sense of focus, her mind swirling with the implications of what she had overheard. She had been serving wealthy businessmen for years, but this was different. Jack Anderson was no ordinary CEO, and the deal he was plotting? It was something far bigger than anything she had ever imagined. As Sarah busied herself with the tables, she couldn't help but wonder about the people Jack was dealing with. She had a sense of who he was, cold, calculated, and ruthless in his business dealings, but she never imagined he would be involved in something this shady. The restaurant's ambience remained sophisticated, with the clinking of glasses and hushed conversations filling the air, but Sarah's thoughts were far from the usual small talk. She had overheard too much. The plan Jack had whispered about was more than just a corporate takeover. It was a manipulation of resources that could hurt thousands of innocent people. Sarah knew she was no expert in business, but what she had heard sounded wrong. She couldn't just let it slide. But what could she do? She was just a waitress, after all. The thought of confronting Jack crossed her mind, but she quickly dismissed it. He was powerful. She was just a worker in a bustling restaurant, invisible to most. No one would listen to her. No one would believe her. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more she realized something. She had to do something. As the night went on, Sarah continued to serve the diners with her usual quiet grace, but a fire had been ignited inside her. She had been underestimated for too long. Jack might think of her as just another waitress, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. Sarah wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just some invisible worker moving through the motions. She had a background, a hidden talent. After finishing her shift, Sarah made her way to the small apartment she shared with her younger brother. It was a far cry from the luxury the CEOs and billionaires she served in the restaurant were used to. Her brother, Tommy, was already asleep by the time she walked in, his room filled with the glow of a dim nightlight. Sarah sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room, the weight of the night's events pressing down on her. She thought about what Jack had said, about the plan he had discussed in hushed tones. She couldn't let it go. She needed more information. Sarah had always been a careful observer, picking up on things others didn't notice. She knew how to listen, not just to words, but to the meaning behind them. She had a knack for understanding things beyond the surface. She had trained herself to spot patterns, to hear the hidden messages in conversation. And now, that skill was going to help her. She logged into her laptop, using her college network to search for any information she could find on Jack Anderson and Anderson Capital. It wasn't long before she uncovered something that made her heart race. There it was, Jack's name, tied to the very deal he had been whispering about. The same project he had been discussing in German. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled up the documents, her eyes scanning the screen. The project was a massive infrastructure deal that could make billions, but it came at a cost. The cost would be borne by vulnerable communities, people who had no idea they were about to be displaced by the very thing Jack was planning. As the night wore on, Sarah's mind raced with what she had discovered. She could feel the weight of the information pressing on her chest. This wasn't just business. This was a scheme to exploit the helpless. And Sarah couldn't stand by and let it happen. She knew she had to act. But how? She couldn't take down a billionaire on her own. She was just one person, a waitress in a high-end restaurant, serving dishes and drinks to people who never thought twice about her existence. She had no resources, no power, but she had something more valuable. She had the truth. She had the power of knowledge. Sarah took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She couldn't wait for someone else to do something. She couldn't wait for the right moment. She was going to take action, even if it meant risking everything. She wasn't going to let Jack get away with this. She wasn't going to let him hurt people just to make more money. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. She was going to confront him. She was going to make him see that she wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who could bring him down if he didn't change his ways. She didn't know how, but she knew she couldn't back down. The plan was set. And tomorrow, she would make her move. The next day, Sarah entered La Belle Époque with a newfound sense of purpose. She was no longer just a waitress. She had become someone who knew too much to remain silent. Her shift was just beginning, but she couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different. As she walked through the bustling restaurant, she couldn't help but glance toward the corner booth where Jack Anderson and his colleagues had sat the night before. The memory of the words she had overheard was still fresh in her mind, and the weight of the information she had uncovered made her stomach twist. She had always been good at reading people, but now, she was reading the situation, every conversation, every movement, every glance. Jack Anderson was not just another CEO. He was part of a bigger game, a game where people's lives were at stake. She could no longer pretend she didn't know. As Sarah made her way to her section, she took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that had suddenly overtaken her. She could feel the eyes of the other waitstaff on her, the usual friendly chatter of the kitchen filling the air. It was all so normal. And yet, nothing was the same. She had a mission now. She wasn't sure how she was going to execute it, but she had to confront Jack. There was no other option. Sarah set about her tasks, refilling drinks, serving plates of food, and moving around the restaurant as she always did. But today, every moment felt heavier than the last. When her break finally came, she slipped into the staff room, her thoughts racing. She pulled out her phone and started looking through the information she had gathered the night before. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the research, pulling up more details about the project Jack had been whispering about. The more she dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a calculated move to destroy communities. The plan involved displacing entire neighborhoods for the sake of building a new complex that would enrich a select few, while leaving many without homes. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't let this happen. The very thought of innocent people losing everything because of greed made her sick. But what could she do? Who would listen to her? She was just a waitress. But then, she remembered something. It wasn't just the information she had that could make a difference. It was her ability to connect the dots, to speak up when others wouldn't. That's what Jack hadn't counted on. She had a voice, and she was going to use it. Her break ended too soon, and Sarah had to get back to work. She walked back onto the floor, but she couldn't focus on the usual tasks. Every part of her mind was fixed on Jack. He would be here soon. She had to be ready. And then, just as the clock struck noon, Jack arrived. He walked in with his usual confidence, flanked by a few of his colleagues. They made their way to their usual table, and Sarah saw the familiar glint of his platinum watch as he sat down. She took a deep breath. This was it. Sarah walked toward their table, her mind racing, but her feet moving with purpose. When she reached them, Jack didn't even look up. He simply ordered his usual, an appetizer, a steak, and a glass of red wine. But Sarah didn't walk away. She stood there, still, for a moment. Her heart was beating in her throat. Then, she spoke. "Mr. Anderson, I need to speak with you." Her voice was calm, controlled, but she could feel the weight of the words hanging in the air. Jack looked up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned her face. There was no fear, no hesitation in her gaze. He studied her for a moment, as though deciding whether she was serious or not. Finally, he set down his menu. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. Sarah took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I overheard you last night," she said, her voice steady. "And I know exactly what you're planning." Jack's face froze, a flicker of something dark passing over his expression. For a split second, Sarah thought he might laugh it off, dismiss her. But then, he didn't. His eyes hardened. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone suddenly colder. Sarah took another step forward, this time leaning slightly toward him, her voice dropping just low enough that only he could hear her. "I know about the deal. The one you're planning to destroy people's homes for. The one that's going to leave thousands of families on the streets for your own profit. And I won't stand by and let it happen." There was silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jack stared at her, his expression unreadable. The other people at the table were watching, but Sarah didn't care. She was beyond the point of worrying about how others saw her. She was going to do what needed to be done. "You're wrong," Jack finally said, his voice low, almost amused. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Sarah was not convinced. "I do," she replied, her voice firm. "And I won't let you get away with it. You may be a powerful CEO, but you've underestimated the people you're hurting. You've underestimated me." Jack's gaze flickered with something. Recognition, maybe, or maybe just the realization that he wasn't dealing with someone who could be brushed aside. But he didn't back down. "You're just a waitress," he said, his tone dismissive. "What do you think you can do?" Sarah smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I'm not just a waitress," she said. "I'm someone who knows the truth. And that's more powerful than anything you can do." Jack didn't say anything more. He just stared at her, his expression unreadable. But Sarah knew something had shifted. He could see that she was not going to let this go. And for the first time, she could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The tension at the table was palpable, and Jack Anderson's icy demeanor gave nothing away. For a moment, Sarah wondered if she had made a mistake. Was she in over her head? But no, she couldn't back down now. The truth was too important, and the stakes were too high. Jack's gaze lingered on her, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak for several seconds, and in that time, Sarah could feel the weight of his stare. The other executives at the table shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly uncertain of how to react to the confrontation happening before them. But Sarah didn't flinch. She stood her ground, meeting Jack's eyes with unwavering resolve. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice low, almost a growl. "You don't know what you're talking about. You think you can just waltz in here and disrupt everything." His words were sharp, but there was a hint of something else in his tone, something that bordered on uncertainty. Sarah didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch, letting him stew in his own discomfort. She wasn't about to make this easy for him. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah finally broke the silence. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," she said, her voice steady. "I heard every word you said last night, and I've seen the documents. You're planning to destroy entire neighborhoods for your profit. Do you really think no one will find out?" Jack's eyes flickered with something. Guilt, maybe, or maybe just the realization that he had underestimated her. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of the table. "You're mistaken if you think I'm the villain in this story," he said, his voice taking on a more measured tone. "This is business. It's about growth, progress. People have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Sarah shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. The greater good, she echoed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You mean the greater good for you and your wealthy friends, right? What about the families who will lose everything because of your so-called progress? What about the people whose homes you'll tear down just so you can build another high-rise? Jack's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. Sarah pressed on, determined to make him see the truth. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about money or business deals. It's about real people. People who will suffer because of your greed. You can call it progress all you want, but it's just a fancy word for exploitation. For the first time, Sarah saw something shift in Jack's eyes. There was a flicker of uncertainty, a momentary crack in his armor. But it was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared. He straightened in his chair, his gaze hardening once more. You think you can change things? He asked, his voice dripping with condescension. You're just a waitress. What can you do against me? Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't let his words shake her. I may just be a waitress, but I'm also someone who knows the truth, she replied, her voice unwavering. And I'm not going to let you get away with this. The room fell silent. The other executives exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Sarah could feel the weight of their judgment, but she didn't care. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here to make Jack face the consequences of his actions. Jack studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to figure her out. For a split second, Sarah wondered if he was going to retaliate, to somehow silence her or dismiss her. But then, he did something unexpected. He stood up. The motion was swift, and his tall frame cast a shadow over her. Sarah stood her ground, refusing to let her nerves show. Jack stepped closer, his presence intimidating, but Sarah didn't move. You're a bold one, Jack said, his voice low and almost admiring. I'll give you that. But you have no idea what you're up against. Sarah held his gaze, not backing down. I know exactly what I'm up against, she said quietly. But you don't scare me. And you won't stop me. Jack's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer before he let out a sigh. You're wasting your time, he said, his voice tinged with something almost regretful. I've worked too hard to let someone like you stand in my way. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. Jack turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the room. He didn't look back, but Sarah could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the unspoken challenge hanging between them. As he reached the door, he paused and glanced over his shoulder, a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said. But you're out of your league. With that, he left the restaurant, leaving Sarah standing there, her heart still racing, her mind reeling from the confrontation. But even as Jack disappeared into the night, Sarah knew one thing for sure. She wasn't done. This wasn't over. The days following her confrontation with Jack were tense, to say the least. Sarah could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her as she moved through La Belle Époque, the restaurant still buzzing with its usual mix of rich patrons and their quiet conversations. But Sarah wasn't focused on the typical chatter anymore. Her mind was elsewhere, on the next step, on how to stop what she knew was coming. The more she thought about Jack and his plan, the more she realized that she had to move quickly. The people who would be affected by his deal, those who had no idea their homes were about to be torn down for another luxury building, deserved to know. She couldn't wait for someone else to act. No one would. Jack had too much power. It was up to her to make sure he didn't get away with it. On her days off, Sarah spent hours researching. She scoured the internet for anything she could find on Anderson Capital and the project Jack had been so careful to hide. Her heart sank as she uncovered more about the scope of the deal. It was bigger than she thought. Not just a few buildings being knocked down for a shiny new high-rise, but entire communities being displaced, families torn apart, and lives ruined for the sake of profit. The more she found, the more determined she became. But still, there was a part of her that felt like a small fish in a massive ocean. Jack Anderson didn't just run a business, he ran an empire. And she was just a waitress with a few facts and a lot of conviction. But Sarah wasn't done. She couldn't be. After a few sleepless nights, Sarah knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to go after Jack directly, not yet, anyway. Instead, she needed to expose the plan. The truth had to come to light. And for that, she needed leverage. On her next shift, she made her move. Jack was sitting at the same corner booth, his usual air of arrogance surrounding him. But this time, Sarah wasn't afraid. She had a mission, and she wasn't going to let him intimidate her. As she walked toward him with a tray of drinks, she felt her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. She placed the drinks down in front of him, her hands steady. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice low but confident. He glanced up, his eyes narrowing when he saw her. He didn't speak at first, just studied her with that same calculating look. "What can I get you today?" she asked, her tone completely professional, though inside, she was fighting the urge to let her nerves show. Jack's eyes flickered with annoyance. "Just the usual," he said curtly, not even bothering to look at the menu. But Sarah didn't move. She stood there, her gaze unwavering. "Actually," she said, her voice steady, "I need to talk to you." Jack looked up at her, a hint of amusement creeping into his features. "About what? You've got your hands full with other tables, don't you?" His words were dismissive, but Sarah could feel the tension rising. This time, she didn't back down. "I know what you're planning," she said quietly. "I know about the deal, about the people you're planning to destroy for your profit." Jack's expression darkened. He set his glass down with a sharp clink and leaned forward. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice low, menacing. "You think you can just walk in here and threaten me?" Sarah's heart was still pounding, but she stood her ground. "I'm not threatening you," she said calmly. "I'm just telling you that I know, and I'm going to stop you." Jack studied her for a long moment, his lips curling into a cold, humorless smile. "You think you can stop me?" he said, his tone almost mocking. "You're just a waitress. What could you possibly do?" Sarah didn't flinch. "I have information," she said simply, "and I'm going to make sure the world knows what you're doing." For a moment, Jack said nothing. Then, slowly, his smirk faded, replaced by a look of cold calculation. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'll make sure you regret this." Sarah's expression softened, a small smile playing on her lips. "You'll regret underestimating me," she replied quietly. "You can't hide behind your money and power forever." Jack stared at her for a long moment before finally standing up. He straightened his suit, adjusted his cufflinks, and looked down at Sarah with one final, dismissive glance. "You're playing a dangerous game, little girl," he said coldly. "But enjoy your moment. It won't last long." With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet restaurant. Sarah didn't move. She stood there, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead of her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jack might have thought he had won, but Sarah knew she had the upper hand now. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a woman with a mission, and she wasn't backing down. As the door to the restaurant swung closed behind Jack, Sarah let out a slow breath. She had just made a powerful enemy, but she also had something far more valuable, something Jack didn't expect. She had the truth, and that truth was going to bring him down. The days that followed Jack's cold departure from La Belle Époque were filled with tension. Sarah felt it in the air every time she entered the restaurant, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. She could still feel his eyes on her, the cold, calculating look he had given her before walking away. She knew that was far from the end. Jack was not a man who let things slide. She had made an enemy, and she knew he wouldn't stop until he had neutralized her threat. But Sarah wasn't backing down. If anything, she felt a new strength bubbling inside her. She was no longer just a waitress. She was someone who had seen the truth, and that truth was her weapon. It was a dangerous game she was playing, but she was ready for it. That night, Sarah found herself at home, sitting at her small desk with her laptop open in front of her. The research she had done so far had only confirmed what she feared. Jack's plans were even more ruthless than she had imagined. His deal wasn't just about money. It was about power, about controlling entire communities, and he was willing to destroy lives to get what he wanted. Sarah's heart raced as she scrolled through the documents, each one more damning than the last. But there was something more she needed to do. The information was valuable, but it wasn't enough. She needed to expose it to the world. The public needed to know what Jack was doing, and she had to be the one to make sure they did. She knew that the only way to bring Jack down was to get the attention of the right people, people with the power to stop him. She couldn't do it alone, but maybe she didn't have to. As Sarah sat there, staring at the screen, a plan began to form in her mind. The next day, she returned to the restaurant, feeling more determined than ever. Jack hadn't been back since their confrontation, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he showed up again. When he did, she would be ready. But today wasn't about Jack, it was about getting her message out there. As Sarah moved through the restaurant, she couldn't help but notice the change in the air. The staff had stopped whispering behind her back, and now, they seemed to look at her with something more, respect, maybe, or fear. Sarah wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. She was on a mission, and nothing was going to distract her. After finishing her shift, Sarah went to the back office and pulled out her phone. She had one contact who might be able to help her, a journalist she had met during one of her college courses. His name was Sam, and he worked for a well-known investigative news outlet. He was the kind of person who could make the truth known, no matter how dangerous it was. Sarah took a deep breath and dialed his number. It rang for a moment before Sam picked up. Hello. His voice sounded tired, but there was a warmth to it that made Sarah feel slightly at ease. Sam, it's Sarah, she said, her voice low. I need your help. I have information that could take down one of the most powerful CEOs in the city. Sam's voice shifted immediately, now alert and full of interest. What kind of information? Sarah explained everything she had uncovered about Jack's plan. The community displacements, the secret deal, the way people's lives were being treated like commodities. She gave him the details, the documents, everything she had. Sam was quiet for a long time. This is big, he finally said. But you need to be careful. If what you're saying is true, Jack will come after you. And he has the resources to make your life a living nightmare. Sarah didn't flinch. I know what I'm up against. But I can't sit back and do nothing while people's lives are destroyed for the sake of greed. There was a long pause before Sam spoke again. All right, I'll take a look at what you've got. But you need to be prepared for the fallout. Once this gets out, there's no going back. Sarah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. I'm ready. Just make sure the world knows what he's doing. They hung up, and Sarah sat there for a moment, her heart pounding. She had just taken the first step toward exposing Jack. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and she knew there would be consequences, but she also knew that this was the only way. She couldn't let him win. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah kept working at La Belle Époque, but now, every moment felt like a countdown. She kept her eyes open, waiting for Jack's return. And then, on the fourth day after their confrontation, he walked in again. This time, he didn't sit with his usual colleagues. Instead, he was alone, his expression cold and unreadable. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. She walked toward him, her movements calm and measured. As she approached, Jack's eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for a brief moment, there was something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, of tension. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He ordered his usual meal, and Sarah didn't hesitate. She leaned in slightly, her voice low. I hope you're ready for the consequences of your actions, she said, her tone steady, unwavering. Jack's eyes darkened, but he didn't respond. He simply looked at her with that same cold, calculating stare. As she walked away, she could feel the weight of his gaze on her back. He knew, and this time, it wasn't just her. He was in the game now. The days after their brief exchange were filled with a palpable sense of unease. Sarah had done it. She had confronted Jack, looked him in the eye, and warned him. But now, as she walked through the restaurant each day, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming. Jack hadn't made a move yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he did. He was too powerful, too dangerous to let something like this slide. The restaurant was filled with its usual air of luxury and whispered conversations. But to Sarah, the sounds now felt distant, muffled by the gnawing anxiety that crept under her skin. Every shift she worked, every plate she served, felt like an act of defiance. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. She had done the right thing, but she knew she couldn't face Jack alone. As much as she hated to admit it, she needed help. Sam, the journalist she had contacted, had gotten back to her with the information she needed. He had reviewed everything Sarah sent him, the documents, the plans, the research, and he had confirmed what she had already known. Jack's project was even bigger than Sarah thought. It wasn't just a few neighborhoods. It was a widespread, systemic plan to clear entire areas for luxury developments, displacing hundreds of families without a second thought. And that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the corruption that ran deep in the deal. Jack wasn't just planning on exploiting the communities. He was involved in bribing officials, using his wealth and influence to ensure that nothing stood in his way. The truth was worse than Sarah had imagined. Sam had a plan. He wanted to write an expose, something that would expose Jack's entire operation to the world. But Sarah had no illusions. If she went public with this, she would be signing her own death warrant. Jack wouldn't stop until she was silenced. And yet, what choice did she have? The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that she had already made the choice. She couldn't walk away now. People's lives were at stake. That night, Sarah stayed up late, her mind racing. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but she also knew she couldn't let fear control her. She had already risked everything by confronting Jack. Now, she needed to make sure he paid for what he was doing. She sent Sam a message. "Let's do this. I'm ready." The next few days were a blur of secrecy and planning. Sarah continued her shifts at the restaurant, acting as though nothing had changed, though her nerves were on edge the entire time. Jack was there nearly every day, watching her with his cold, calculating eyes. He hadn't made another move yet, but Sarah could feel his presence like a shadow over her. She had made her decision, but the fear still gnawed at her. What if he found out? What if he turned everything around on her? But that was a risk she had to take. On the day of the release, Sarah stayed home from work. She couldn't risk being at the restaurant when the story broke. She had spent hours the night before going over everything with Sam, making sure the details were perfect. At noon, the article went live. The headline read, "Billionaire CEO uses corruption and displacement to build empire on the backs of the poor." The article laid bare everything Jack had done. His manipulation of officials, his exploitation of vulnerable communities, the millions he would pocket from the deal, all at the cost of those who had no power to fight back. Sarah sat in her apartment, staring at her phone, waiting for the inevitable. She didn't have to wait long. The calls started coming in almost immediately, first from reporters, then from unknown numbers. She ignored them all. She knew what she had to do next. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from Sam. It read, "It's out. You were right. This is going to blow up. Get ready." But even as the text came in, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the calls or the attention. It was Jack. She knew he wouldn't sit idly by while this happened. Sure enough, an hour later, she received another message. This time, it was from an unknown number. The message was simple, but it sent a chill down her spine. "You've made a big mistake." Sarah swallowed hard. The game had just changed. She had expected retaliation, but she hadn't expected this kind of response. Jack didn't just want to silence her. He wanted to make sure she would regret ever stepping into this fight. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a call. She hesitated for a moment, but then she answered. "Hello," she said, her voice steady but her heart pounding. "You thought you could take me down, didn't you?" Jack's voice came through the phone, smooth and cold. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. You've made a mistake, Sarah, and you're going to pay for it." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone, but she refused to show fear. "You can't scare me," she said. "You've hurt enough people already. I won't let you get away with it." Jack's laughter on the other end was dark, almost predatory. "You're a fool," he said. "You've played your hand, and now you're mine." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the screen, her pulse racing. She had no illusions now. Jack wasn't going to let this go. He was coming for her. But she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The following days were a blur of tension and anticipation. Sarah couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that Jack was closing in on her. His threat lingered in her mind, like a shadow that refused to leave. He had warned her. He had told her she was making a mistake. But Sarah was no stranger to adversity. She had faced challenges before, none of them as high stakes as this. But still, she was no rookie. She had a cause now, a purpose, and she wasn't backing down. But the reality of Jack's power started to sink in. He wasn't just a wealthy CEO with influence. He was connected, untouchable. The media frenzy surrounding the expose she and Sam had orchestrated only intensified, and the calls kept coming. Reporters, journalists, bloggers, all of them wanted to know more. But Sarah didn't give them answers. Not directly. She knew this was bigger than herself. She had to be smart. She kept her distance, avoided public attention, and waited. Her phone buzzed constantly, but the one message she couldn't ignore came from Sam. "We've got his attention," it read. "I know," Sarah replied, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed. "He called me. It's not over yet." The words echoed in her mind. "You're mine." The chill in Jack's voice sent shivers down her spine. The next day, she was back at work, trying to act normal, trying to go through the motions. But every step felt heavy, like she was walking through water. The restaurant was still the same, elegant, busy, filled with the rich and powerful. But now, Sarah felt like a target. She couldn't stop glancing over her shoulder, waiting for something, anything to happen. She had no idea what Jack would do next, but she knew it wouldn't be good. Then it came. Jack walked in, as calm and collected as ever. He didn't acknowledge Sarah right away. He didn't need to. He had a way of making his presence felt without uttering a word. The hush that fell over the restaurant when he entered wasn't accidental. People shifted in their seats, adjusting their postures as if they were trying to become invisible. Sarah tried not to look at him, tried to focus on the other tables. But her eyes betrayed her. She glanced over at Jack, just in time to meet his gaze. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certain coldness in his eyes that sent a wave of dread through her. He knew she had crossed a line. He knew she had exposed his plan. And now he was here. He was watching her. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. She moved gracefully through the restaurant, serving drinks, bringing dishes to the tables, acting like everything was normal. But in her mind, the storm was already building. As the evening wore on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Jack wasn't just there for dinner. He was waiting, watching, calculating. And then, as if on cue, one of the managers came to her. "Sarah," he said in a low voice, "Mr. Anderson would like to speak with you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew this was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. She nodded, a small, controlled smile playing on her lips. "Of course," she replied. She followed the manager to Jack's table, her mind racing. What was he going to say? What did he want from her? Jack was already looking at her when she approached, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. "Please sit," he said, his voice smooth but with a slight edge. Sarah took a seat, maintaining her composure. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. Not this time. "I see you've been busy," Jack said, his eyes flicking to the media buzz on his phone. "It's been quite the story." Sarah didn't respond. She simply met his gaze, waiting for him to continue. "I admire your courage," Jack continued, his voice taking on a more contemplative tone. "Not many people would risk everything for something they believe in." "I'm not here to impress you," Sarah said quietly. "I'm here to stop you." Jack's smile was almost imperceptible, but there was something dangerous in it. "You think you can stop me?" he asked, his tone almost amused. "I've built this empire for years. You really believe you have the power to bring it down?" Sarah leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. "I don't need to bring your empire down. I just need to make sure the world knows what you're doing." For a moment, Jack didn't say anything. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of something. Maybe fear, maybe respect. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said slowly. "But this isn't over, Sarah. Not by a long shot." She didn't respond. Instead, she stood up, her movements deliberate and calm. "I'm not afraid of you," she said softly, "and I'll keep fighting until the truth comes out." She turned and walked away, leaving Jack behind, his gaze still following her. As Sarah made her way back to the kitchen, she felt a surge of determination. She knew Jack wouldn't back down easily, but neither would she. This was just the beginning. The fight for justice had only just begun, and she wasn't going to stop until she had won. The following week was a blur of quiet tension. Sarah's life had shifted into a new, dangerous rhythm. Every time she stepped into La Belle Époque, the weight of Jack's threat hung over her like a dark cloud. She could feel his eyes on her every time he walked in, and she knew he was watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. But Sarah was done being afraid. She had faced worse in her life. Jack Anderson was just another obstacle in her way. The truth had already been exposed. The world knew about his corrupt deal, his plan to destroy communities for profit. The article had gone viral, and the media was buzzing with outrage. But now came the real test. Would anyone actually do anything about it? Sarah didn't have the power or the connections to bring Jack down herself, but she knew someone who could. Sam, the journalist who had helped her get the story out, was in the process of pushing the investigation further. She trusted him, but as the days dragged on, she could feel the walls closing in. Jack had the means to silence anyone who stood in his way, and she knew it wouldn't be long before he tried to shut down the media attention. Sarah continued to work at La Belle Époque, keeping her head low, doing her job while waiting for the next move. Then, on a seemingly normal day, everything changed. She was halfway through her shift when the phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something told her she needed to pick it up. "Hello," she answered, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "Sarah Matthews?" A voice on the other end was familiar, but different. It was deeper, more commanding. "This is David Mercer, Chief of Staff at Anderson Capital." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The words, Anderson Capital, echoed in her mind, sending a jolt of fear through her. "Mr. Anderson would like to speak with you," David continued, his tone cold and businesslike. "We'd like to offer you a deal." The words hit her like a punch. A deal? What could Jack possibly want with her now? "I'm listening," she said, her voice a little tighter than usual. "We're aware of your involvement in the story," David said, his voice calculated. "We also know you've made some enemies. This doesn't have to escalate further. Come meet with Mr. Anderson. We'll discuss terms." Sarah didn't hesitate. She knew this wasn't a simple meeting. Jack was making his move, and it was time to take a stand. "I won't meet with him," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I won't back down. You can't silence me." There was a pause on the other end of the line before David spoke again, his voice lower, almost threatening. "This is your last chance, Sarah. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." "I'm not afraid of you or your boss," Sarah said, her tone unwavering. "If you want to try to silence me, go ahead. But I won't stop. People need to know the truth." There was a sharp exhale on the other end, followed by the sound of a click as David hung up. Sarah stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to her ear. She had expected a threat, but hearing it was another thing entirely. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. She was done being intimidated. She wasn't going to let Jack or anyone else control her. That night, as Sarah walked back to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to escalate. She had expected Jack to retaliate, but not this quickly. The warning shot had been fired. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to act. When she arrived home, she sat down at her desk and pulled out her laptop. She needed to make sure everything she had was in place. The evidence, the documents, the recordings, all of it. Jack couldn't just sweep this under the rug. She couldn't let him. Sarah spent hours organizing her files, checking every detail, making sure everything was airtight. She wasn't going to give him any way to discredit her. She had to be ready. The next day, she sent the final pieces of evidence to Sam. He responded almost immediately. "We're going public with this. It's time." The realization hit her like a tidal wave. This was it. The point of no return. She was going to expose Jack once and for all. There was no turning back. She could feel the weight of the decision settling in her chest. Jack wouldn't back down, and neither would she. She had already risked everything by speaking out. But now, it wasn't just about her. It was about the people Jack had hurt, the lives he had destroyed. It was about justice. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. She picked it up, her heart skipping when she saw the number. "Sam." "It's done," he said, his voice tinged with excitement and urgency. "The article's live. It's everywhere." Sarah felt a rush of relief, but it was quickly followed by a deep sense of unease. She had done what she set out to do. But now, the real fight was just beginning. The aftermath of the article's release was swift and brutal. Within hours, social media exploded. News outlets picked up the story. And soon, Jack Anderson's name was all over the headlines. Sarah had watched the media frenzy unfold from her apartment, her phone buzzing constantly with notifications, each one more frantic than the last. But as the wave of attention swept over Jack, Sarah felt something deeper, something darker, settling in her stomach. This wasn't just a victory. It was the beginning of a much larger war. Jack hadn't gone down easily, and she knew he wasn't the type of person to simply let a little exposure ruin him. No, he would fight back, and when he did, it would be brutal. But for now, the world knew the truth. Sarah kept her distance from the growing storm, staying at home and out of sight. The media had caught on to her, too, and she knew it wouldn't be long before the pressure to speak up would become unbearable. But she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The phone calls had started almost immediately, too. First from reporters, then from unknown numbers. She ignored them all. Her focus was on something much more important, surviving the storm Jack was about to unleash. A week passed, and the tension only grew. Jack hadn't made a public statement, but Sarah could feel his presence everywhere. She was starting to see things, whispers behind her back, the sudden coldness in the restaurant when she arrived for her shifts, the unspoken judgment in the air. It was a strange, suffocating feeling, and it made her more determined to finish what she had started. But the calls kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. Finally, on a quiet afternoon, her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Sam or a reporter, it was a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Tonight. I'll be at your apartment at 8. No name. No details. Just the promise of something much bigger." She stared at the screen for a long moment, trying to make sense of the message. Was it Jack? Was it someone working for him? Or was it something else entirely? Her mind raced with possibilities, but she knew one thing for sure. She had no choice but to meet them. If it was Jack's people, this could be her only chance to find out what he was planning. If it wasn't, well, then she had to know what was going on. The rest of the afternoon dragged by. Sarah found herself pacing around her apartment, her nerves eating away at her. Every time she heard a car outside, she froze, heart pounding, waiting for someone to knock at her door. But when 8 o'clock finally arrived, the doorbell didn't ring. Instead, there was a soft knock, almost tentative. She opened the door slowly, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. Standing there wasn't a corporate thug or a lawyer from Anderson Capital. It was Sam. "You're alive," she said, relief flooding through her. Sam gave a tired smile and stepped inside. "Barely," he said, his voice a little strained. "But we need to talk. It's not over. Jack's making his move." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The story's out. People know the truth." Sam shook his head. "It's not just about the article. Jack's playing a long game. He's already started cleaning up his mess. He's offering people settlements, silencing witnesses, and I heard rumors that he's digging into your background." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean, digging into my background?" "I don't know the details," Sam replied. "But it's clear he's trying to find something to use against you. Anything that'll discredit the story. He'll stop at nothing to protect his empire." "What are we going to do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to act fast," Sam said, his eyes narrowing. "I've been working with some other journalists. We're going to launch a second wave, an even bigger investigation into Anderson Capital. This time, we'll have more than just the deal. We'll dig deeper into his financial ties, his offshore accounts, and his corrupt dealings. We need to bring him down once and for all." Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. She couldn't let Jack win. Not now. Not after everything she had uncovered. "How can I help?" she asked. Sam gave her a tight smile. "You've already done the hardest part, Sarah. You've exposed him. Now we finish it." The next few days passed in a blur of frantic phone calls and late-night meetings. Sam, Sarah, and their network of journalists worked tirelessly, piecing together Jack's hidden operations, the layers of corruption and manipulation he had built over the years. Sarah's role was clear: stay out of sight, keep quiet, and let the investigation unfold. Jack had made his move, and now it was their turn. But even as the investigation gained traction, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Jack was still one step ahead. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the retaliation that would inevitably come. She wasn't wrong. A week later, she received a message that made her blood run cold. It was from Jack. "You've made a mistake, Sarah, and you will regret it." The following days after Jack's message were tense. Sarah couldn't ignore the growing fear that clung to her every move. She had done everything by the book, keeping her head low, trying to work in silence. But the walls were closing in, and every step she took felt more like a countdown to something she wasn't ready for. Jack's threat had been clear. He wasn't playing games anymore. The pressure was building, but Sarah knew she couldn't back down. She couldn't afford to. Sam had been working around the clock, gathering information, piecing together Jack's secrets. He called her almost daily with updates. But it wasn't just the media anymore. Jack's influence was spreading, and with every passing hour, it became more clear that he was willing to go to any lengths to protect his empire. Sarah's phone buzzed again late one night. It was a message from Sam. "They're onto us. Jack's getting more aggressive. He's got eyes everywhere." The words sent a shiver through Sarah, but she didn't let herself panic. This wasn't the time for fear. They had come too far. She sent a quick reply. "What do we do?" The response came almost immediately. "We go public again. But this time, it's different. We hit him where it hurts." Sarah read those words over and over. She knew what Sam meant. They had to get the truth to the people in a way that couldn't be ignored. The fight wasn't just about exposing Jack anymore. It was about stopping him from causing any more harm. The next day, as Sarah worked through her shift, her mind kept racing. The restaurant was busy, as always, but it felt like a distant noise compared to the storm brewing inside her. Jack had made his move, and now it was time for them to make theirs. Sarah had no illusions. She wasn't just fighting Jack anymore. She was fighting a system, a whole network of powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect their wealth and influence. And Sarah was just one person against them. But for the first time, that felt like enough. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the one who could bring Jack down. She had the truth, and the truth was powerful. That evening, Sarah received a call from Sam. It's done. The second piece of the investigation is out. We're getting a lot of traction. Sarah could feel her heart race. What does that mean? Is he reacting? Sam paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was low, measured. He's trying to discredit us. But the damage has already been done. People are starting to ask questions. It's only a matter of time before someone bigger takes notice. Sarah felt a surge of relief. This was it. The tide was turning. The media was buzzing, the pressure was building, and people were starting to look at Jack. But she knew the hardest part was yet to come. She couldn't let her guard down. That night, as Sarah walked home from the restaurant, the usual chill in the air felt different. It wasn't just the cold. It was the weight of what was coming next. Jack wouldn't go down without a fight. She knew he'd be planning his next move. And this time, she wasn't sure she'd be able to predict what he'd do. As she rounded the corner to her apartment building, Sarah froze. There, standing in the shadows by her door, was a figure. For a moment, she thought it might be Jack, or worse, one of his people. But as the figure stepped forward, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was a man she recognized. David Mercer, Jack's right-hand man. He didn't speak at first, just watched her with that same cold look he had worn when they'd spoken before. Sarah's pulse quickened. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. David didn't answer right away. He glanced up and down the street before taking a step closer. "You've made a mess, Sarah," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Jack doesn't take kindly to people who try to ruin his plans." Sarah didn't back down. "I'm not the one ruining lives. He is." David's lips curled into a smile, but there was no humor in it. "You don't understand, do you? Jack built this empire. He's untouchable. You think you can just expose him and walk away?" Sarah shook her head, a small, defiant smile on her lips. "I already have, and I'm not going to stop now." David's smile faded. He stepped even closer, his breath now cold against her skin. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. This isn't a game. You're playing with fire, and you'll get burned." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "I've already been burned. I'm done being afraid." David's expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're up against. Jack will destroy you if you don't back off." "Then let him try," Sarah replied, her voice steady. David studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. He turned to leave, but before he did, he spoke one final time. "You're in over your head," he said quietly. "But you'll learn that the hard way." With that, he disappeared into the night. Sarah stood there for a moment, her heart still pounding. The encounter had left her shaken, but she wasn't backing down. She had made her choice. And now, there was no turning back. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on her. The weight of Jack's words still echoed in her mind. "You're in over your head." He had said it with such certainty, like a threat he had delivered before, but something inside Sarah refused to believe it. She wasn't some naive bystander anymore. She was in this fight, and she was going to finish it. The following days were full of quiet tension. Sarah went to work at La Belle Époque, her routine seemingly unchanged, but every movement she made felt like she was walking on eggshells. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not now. Not when Jack was watching her so closely. The restaurant was still as busy as ever, but it felt different. There was an air of anxiety hanging over everything. The staff was more on edge, the guests a little more distant. Everyone seemed to sense the storm brewing. It wasn't just the pressure from the media or the whispers of reporters hounding her for more. No, it was Jack's presence, his unspoken threat that loomed over her every move. She had expected retaliation, but it still didn't prepare her for the cold, calculating silence that Jack seemed to maintain. It was as though he was always there, just behind her, watching her every step. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was enough to make her feel like she was living on borrowed time. Sam kept in touch, as always, but Sarah could sense the unease in his voice. He had done everything in his power to ensure that the second wave of the investigation was going public, but Sarah could tell he was just as worried as she was. Jack was starting to leverage his connections, pulling strings behind the scenes to discredit her and anyone else involved in the expose. Still, she couldn't afford to think about that. The media was buzzing, the truth was out, and she wasn't about to let him take that away from her. One night, a few days after the tense encounter with David Mercer, Sarah returned home to find something unexpected. Her apartment door was ajar. Her heart skipped a beat. The faint smell of coffee drifted in the air. Sarah didn't hesitate. She pushed the door open slowly, scanning the room for any sign of intrusion. But there, sitting at her kitchen table, was someone she didn't expect. Sam. He looked up as she entered, his face tense, his expression serious. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky but determined. Sam leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I think Jack is about to make his move," he said, his voice low. "He's going after everything, Sarah. The media, the investigation, everything." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, feeling a cold knot form in her stomach. "He's covering his tracks," Sam replied. "I've got sources telling me he's moving money around, making sure nothing can be traced back to him. He's even reached out to the board of directors at Anderson Capital. They're circling the wagons, preparing to shut down anything we've got." Sarah's heart sank. She had known Jack wouldn't give up easily, but this was different. He was playing for keeps now. "So what's the plan?" she asked, her voice firmer now. "We fight back," Sam said. "We go after the real money trail. We need to expose the entire financial network he's built. We're going public with everything. If we can hit him in his wallet, we can stop him in his tracks." Sarah nodded slowly. She had already risked so much, but now, the stakes were higher than ever. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not backing down now. Let's finish this." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with everything that was happening. She thought about Jack, his cold demeanor, his calculated threats, the way he had dismissed her as nothing more than a pawn. But he was wrong. He had underestimated her. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who had the power to expose him, and she wasn't about to let him get away with it. The next day, Sarah received a message from Sam. "The next phase is going live. Prepare yourself." She felt a wave of nerves wash over her, but she knew there was no turning back now. She couldn't hide. She couldn't run. This was her fight, and she was going to see it through. That evening, the media blitz began. The new wave of the investigation hit the airwaves, and the world learned about the deeper layers of Jack's corruption. His money laundering schemes, his ties to criminal organizations, and the way he had manipulated the stock market to line his pockets. It was all there, everything Sarah and Sam had uncovered. The press went wild. The articles piled up, the headlines screamed Jack's name, and Sarah watched it all unfold. But she also felt the familiar, cold presence creeping back into her life. Jack hadn't given up yet. She knew he would be coming for her. The question now wasn't whether she could stop him. It was how far he would go to silence her. The night after the final wave of the investigation went live was a restless one. Sarah tossed and turned in her bed, the weight of everything that had transpired still heavy on her chest. The media had picked up the story with a fury, and Jack's empire was beginning to crumble. But she knew it was far from over. Jack wasn't the type of man to go down without a fight, and despite all the progress, she had the sinking feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. She was right. The very next morning, she received a call from Sam. His voice was tense, urgent. "Sarah, you need to be careful. Jack's making moves. His people are reaching out to the board members, trying to shut us down. They're threatening lawsuits, smear campaigns, anything they can do to discredit you." Sarah swallowed, her stomach sinking. "I knew this was coming," she replied quietly. "But I can't back down now. We've come too far." Sam hesitated before responding. "I'm with you, but we have to be smart. Jack has too many resources, too many connections. This fight is about more than just the truth now. It's about survival." Sarah stood by the window, watching the city below. The world was changing, and so was she. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the people Jack had hurt, for the lives he had destroyed in his pursuit of wealth and power. She was fighting for the truth. That day, she prepared herself for the storm she knew was coming. She didn't know what Jack would do next, but she had to be ready. As the hours passed, she felt a sense of foreboding growing inside her. The media was abuzz with stories of Jack's financial empire unraveling, but Sarah knew it wouldn't be long before Jack's retaliation began. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Tonight. I'll be at your place at 8. The message sent a shiver down her spine. Jack's people? Was this some sort of trap? She didn't have time to waste on guessing. She had to find out who it was and what they wanted. That evening, as the clock neared 8, Sarah's nerves were on edge. She had no idea what was going to happen, but she wasn't about to back down. The doorbell rang, and her heart skipped a beat. She opened the door cautiously, expecting to see someone she didn't know. But standing there was someone who had become all too familiar. It was David Mercer. "We need to talk," he said, his voice as cold as ever. "Come inside," Sarah replied, stepping aside. David walked into her apartment, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He glanced around briefly before taking a seat at her kitchen table. Sarah remained standing, her mind racing. "What did he want now?" "I'm not here to make threats," David said, his voice calm but firm. "But you've made a big mistake, Sarah. You've exposed something that shouldn't have been exposed." Sarah didn't back down. "I exposed the truth. Something you've been hiding for far too long." David's eyes narrowed, but he didn't react immediately. Instead, he folded his hands in front of him, as if weighing his next words carefully. "Jack's not going to let this go," he said, his tone almost resigned. "He's not some businessman you can just topple with a few articles. This goes beyond just you. There are powerful people involved in this, people you don't want to cross." Sarah felt a surge of determination. "I've already crossed that line, and I'm not turning back." David stared at her for a long moment. For a second, Sarah thought he might back off, but then he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Jack has always protected his interests at any cost. He's willing to destroy everything in his path to keep his empire intact. He won't stop. You need to understand that." Sarah shook her head, her resolve unwavering. "I understand perfectly. He's destroyed lives, including my own, and I'm going to make sure he doesn't destroy any more." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't just about Jack. It's about the entire system. You're up against something far bigger than you realize." "I know exactly what I'm up against," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "And I'm not afraid." David didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he stood up, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he turned toward the door. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "But it's not too late to back off. You can walk away. I'm offering you a way out." Sarah stood firm, refusing to let his words affect her. "I don't want a way out. I want justice." David paused at the door, glancing over his shoulder. "You'll learn the hard way," he said, his voice soft but filled with finality. With that, he left, the door clicking shut behind him. Sarah stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that this was just the beginning. Jack wouldn't give up, but neither would she. She had come this far. There was no turning back now.